The United Nations is an international organization founded in 1945 after the Second World War by 51 countries. It is committed to maintaining international peace and security, developing friendly relations among nations, and promoting social progress, including better living standards and human rights. Due to its unique international character and the powers vested in its founding charter, the organization can take action on a wide range of issues. It also provides a forum for its 193 member states to express their views through the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, and the various other bodies and committees. The work of the United Nations reaches every corner of the globe. Although best known for peacekeeping, peace building, conflict prevention, and humanitarian assistance, there are many other ways the United Nations and its specialized agencies, funds, and programs affect our lives and make the world a better place. The organization works on a broad range of fundamental issues, such as sustainable development, environmental protection, refugee protection, disaster relief, counterterrorism, disarmament and non-proliferation, promoting democracy around the globe, human rights, gender equality and the advancement of women, governance, economic and social development and international health, clearing landmines, expanding food production, and more, in order to achieve its goals and coordinate efforts for a safer world for this and future generations. The four main purposes of the UN are to keep peace throughout the world, to develop friendly relations among nations, to help nations work together to improve the lives of poor people, to conquer hunger, disease, and literacy, and to encourage respect for each other's rights and freedoms, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations to achieve the aforementioned goals. The United Nations emblem is one of the most recognized emblems in the world, and what it represents is immediately understood by all. The first emblem associated with the United Nations was designed by the Presentation Branch of the United States Office of Strategic Services in 1945, in response to the request for a logo for the San Francisco Conference, during which the UN Charter was drafted. The design consisted of a circular representation of a map of the world extending to the 40th parallel south, with the 100th meridian west of Greenwich in the lower vertical position. The Secretary-General subsequently encouraged the Assembly to adopt a design that would become the official seal and emblem of the United Nations. On December 7, 1946, the Assembly approved a modified version of the San Francisco design. The revised emblem consists of a map of the world on a polar azimutally equidistant projection surrounded by two olive branches. These two symbols speak for themselves. The olive branch is a symbol of peace, while the world map represents the organization in its quest to attain world peace. At the second regular session of the General Assembly, the Secretary-General submitted a memorandum stating the need for a United Nations flag to be used by the United Nations committees and commissions around the world, as well as at the United Nations headquarters and information centers. On October 20, 1947, the General Assembly adopted a resolution that states that the flag of the United Nations shall be the official emblem adopted by the General Assembly, centered on a light blue field. The light blue color, however, has no special significance. Although the UN flag may be freely displayed to demonstrate support for the UN and its work, use of the UN emblem, name, or initials for commercial purposes is restricted by General Assembly Resolution 92-1, which was adopted in 1946. The resolution states that the UN emblem and seal could not be used without the authorization of the Secretary-General in order to prevent its misuse. In the century prior to the UN's creation, several international treaty organizations, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, were formed to ensure protection and assistance for victims of armed conflict and strife. In 1914, a political assassination in Sarajevo set off a chain of events that led to the outbreak of World War I. As more and more young men were sent down into the trenches, influential voices in the United States and Britain began calling for the establishment of a permanent international body to maintain peace in the post-war world. President Woodrow Wilson became a vocal advocate of this concept, and in 1918 he included a sketch of the international body in his 14-point proposal to end the war. In November 1918, the Central Powers agreed to an armistice to halt the killing in World War I. 2 months later, the Allies met with Germany and Austria-Hungary at Versailles to hammer out formal peace terms. President Wilson wanted peace, but the United Kingdom and France disagreed, forcing harsh war reparations on their former enemies. The League of Nations was approved, and in the summer of 1919, Wilson presented the Treaty of Versailles and the Covenant of the League of Nations to the U.S. Senate for ratification. On 10 January 1920, the League of Nations formally came into being, when the Covenant of the League of Nations, ratified by 42 nations in 1919, took effect. However, at some point the League became ineffective when it failed to act against the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. It also failed against the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, despite trying to talk to Benito Mussolini as he used the time to send an army to Africa. So the League had a plan for Mussolini to just take part of Ethiopia, but he ignored the League. The League tried putting sanctions on Italy, but Italy had already conquered Ethiopia, and the League had failed. During 1938, Britain and France tried negotiating directly with Hitler, but this failed in 1939, when Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia. When war broke out in 1939, the League closed down and its headquarters in Geneva remained empty throughout the war. The earliest concrete plan for a new world organization began under the aegis of the U.S. State Department in 1939. The text of the Declaration by United Nations was drafted at the White House on 29 December 1941 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Roosevelt aide Harry Hopkins. It incorporated Soviet suggestions but left no role for France. Four policemen was coined to refer to four major Allied countries: United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and Republic of China, which emerged in the Declaration by United Nations. Roosevelt first coined the term United Nations to describe the Allied countries. On New Year's Day 1942, President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill, Maxim Litvinov of the USSR, and Sun Tse-ven, generally known in English as TV Sung of China, signed a short document which later came to be known as the United Nations Declaration. And the next day, the representatives of 21 other nations added their signatures. The term United Nations was officially used when 26 governments signed this declaration. The official document reads as follows: A joint declaration by the United States of America, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, China, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Costa Rica, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Greece, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, India, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Norway, Panama, Poland, South Africa, and Yugoslavia. The government signatory hereto, having subscribed to a common program of purposes and principles embodied in the joint declaration of the President of the United States of America and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, dated August 14, 1941, known as the Atlantic Charter. Being convinced that complete victory over their enemies is essential to defend life, liberty, independence, and religious freedom, and to preserve human rights and justice in their own lands as well as in other lands, and that they are now engaged in a common struggle against savage and brutal forces seeking to subjugate the world. Declare. Each government pledges itself to employ its full resources, military or economic, against those members of the Tripartite Pact and its adherents with which such government is at war. Each government pledges itself to cooperate with the governments signatory hereto and not to make a separate armistice or peace with the enemies. The foregoing declaration may be adhered to by other nations which are or which may be rendering material assistance and contributions in the struggle for victory over Hitlerism. During the war, the United Nations became the official term for the Allies. To join, countries had to sign the declaration and declare war on the Axis. The UN system is based on 5 principal organs: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat. A 6th principal organ, the Trusteeship Council, suspended operations on 1 November 1994 upon the independence of Palau, the last remaining UN trustee territory. 4 of the 5 principal organs are located at the main UN headquarters in New York City. The International Court of Justice is located in The Hague, the Netherlands, while other major agencies are based in the UN offices at Geneva, Vienna, and Nairobi. Other UN institutions are located throughout the world. The 6 official languages of the UN used in intergovernmental meetings and documents are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. On the basis of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations, the UN and its agencies are immune from the laws of the countries where they operate, safeguarding the UN's impartiality with regard to the host and member countries. Below the 6 organs sit a collection of entities and organizations, some of which are actually older than the UN itself and operate with almost complete independence from it. These include specialized agencies, research and training institutions, programs and funds, and other UN entities. Though the UN's primary mandate is peacekeeping, the division between the US and USSR often paralyzed the organization, generally allowing it to intervene only in conflicts distant from the Cold War. 2 notable exceptions were a Security Council resolution on 7 July 1950, authorizing a US-led coalition to repel the North Korean invasion of South Korea, passed in the absence of the USSR, and the signing of the Korean Armistice Agreement on 27 July 1953. On 29 November 1947, the General Assembly approved the resolution to partition Palestine, approving the creation of the State of Israel. In 1948, the General Assembly adopted a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, drafted by a committee headed by American diplomat and activist Eleanor Roosevelt, and including the French lawyer René Cassin. The document proclaims basic civil, political, and economic rights common to all human beings, though its effectiveness towards achieving these ends has been disputed since its drafting. The Declaration serves as a common standard of achievement for all people and all nations, rather than a legally binding document, but it has become the basis of 2 binding treaties, the 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In practice, the UN is unable to take significant action against human rights abuses without a Security Council resolution, though it does substantial work in investigating and reporting abuses. On 7 November 1956, the first UN peacekeeping force was established to end the Suez Crisis. However, the UN was unable to intervene against the USSR's simultaneous invasion of Hungary following that country's revolution. On 14 July 1960, the UN established the United Nations operation in the Congo, the largest military force of its early decades, to bring order to the breakaway state of Katanga, restoring it to the control of the Democratic Republic of the Congo by 11 May 1964. While traveling to meet rebel leader Moise Tsombe during the conflict, Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld died in a plane crash, and months later he was posthumously awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1964, Hammarskjöld's successor, Utante, deployed a UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus, which would become one of the UN's longest-running peacekeeping missions. With the spread of decolonization in the 1960s, the organization's membership saw an influx of newly independent nations. In 1960 alone, 17 new states joined the UN, 16 of them from Africa. On 25 October 1971, with opposition from the United States, but with the support of many Third World nations, the mainland Communist People's Republic of China was given the Chinese seat on the Security Council in place of the Republic of China that occupied Taiwan. The vote was widely seen as a sign of waning U.S. influence in the organization. With an increasing Third World presence and the failure of UN mediation in conflicts in the Middle East, Vietnam, and Kashmir, the UN increasingly shifted its attention to its ostensibly secondary goals of economic development and cultural exchange. By the 1970s, the UN budget for social and economic development was far greater than its peacekeeping budget. In 1979, the General Assembly adopted the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, followed by the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1989. With the end of the Cold War, the push for human rights action took on new impetus. The United Nations Commission on Human Rights was formed in 1993 to oversee human rights issues for the UN, following the recommendation of that year's World Conference on Human Rights. In 2006, it was replaced by a Human Rights Council consisting of 47 nations. Also in 2006, the General Assembly passed a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and in 2011, it passed its first resolution recognizing the rights of LGBT people. Other UN bodies responsible for women's rights issues include the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, the United Nations Development Fund for Women, created in 1976, and the United Nations International Research and Training Institute for the Advancement of Women, founded in 1979. The UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, one of 3 bodies with a mandate to oversee issues related to indigenous peoples, held its first session in 2002. Today, we must acknowledge that the UN has fallen far short of fulfilling all the expectations raised over the span of its history. But there can be no doubt, however, that over the years, the United Nations has accomplished much and has shown time and again how necessary it is to member states and people worldwide. It was within the walls of its assemblies that the initiatives that led to the adoption of the Millennium Development Goals was launched in 2000. The Millennium Project has focused member states' attention on the problems that must be solved if millions of people around the world are to enjoy quality of life, decent livelihoods, and a measure of dignity. It is through the efforts of the United Nations to help those who cannot help themselves, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and to ease the suffering of so many that we can truly see the pain of progress.
I have a dream today. Free at last. free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.